ahead and call this work session on the Chitose trip. Before I turn it over, I want to just give a quick couple of informational pieces. So some of you know this, but I will not be at the meeting this upcoming Tuesday. So France, I think she might be stepped up, will be chairing that meeting. So everyone be good for Ms. LaFrance, please. Then, I won't be there because I will be attending a summit in LA regarding the census and some complete counts work that some regional elected officials are doing. Then second, everyone should have gotten an email today regarding some goals and vision statements that I have been working on with Clerk's office and Suzanne and others. So those were sent to you in advance of our meeting on the 27th. So that's when we'll be really going into it. But Barbara should have sent those out today. I remember seeing those. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, we should do introduction. Sorry. Let's go ahead and start on this side.
Crystal Kennedy.
Felix Rivera.
Steve Peterson.
Austin Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
John Weddleton. Christopher Constant. All right, we have Ellen here from 49th State. So I made a PowerPoint presentation, just a slideshow of a collection of photographs. And I apologize, the photographs aren't comprehensive because it was hard to document everything and actually participate in it. And some of the pictures vanished from a work shared group that I couldn't put in there. But I have photos from pretty much every element of the trip. And so, and Mr. Dunbar, now the mayor's here, can help discuss the points. And I will say the best photographs did not make it into this slideshow.
Thank you.
So when we arrived, it was unbelievable. Right at the airport gate outside, there were 15, 20 people waiting for us. And it was very kind.
Including the mayor and some of his senior staff.
Yep. So we had an incredible welcoming the next morning. We arrived late at night. We got up the next morning, kind of headed over to City Hall, and I don't think this was documented at all, but they had a 3-story City Hall, this beautiful atrium with this wood carvings you wouldn't believe. It looked very Alaskan actually. And from the front steps of the building all the way to the 3rd story where this room is, every single staff person from City Hall lined up both sides of us, clapping the whole way in, the mayor leading the delegation, Forrest and I, and then everyone behind us. I could barely breathe. It was so intense to have that reception.
In fact, he wants it to be that way everywhere he goes.
Yes. Ethan can be in front.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Great Northern.
Yeah.
So then we went that day and toured the Kirin Beer Factory, which was super fun. We visited briefly outside the Kikkoman soy sauce factory. Ethan, Forrest, and myself actually went into a candy factory and toured their operation, which was quite amazing. 80 degrees, and inside it was a bakery, so it was even hotter. In this outfit, we made candy.
Can I speak
Please,
to that briefly?
yes.
I don't know, maybe you have this on here. So the interesting thing from this, from a policy perspective, is they have these interesting system of like industrial parks, and so it's sort of separated from the rest of town. It's this wooded area, and then they have these large kind of plots, these sort of squares, and they do the industry there. Then they have these streets that kind of sort of a grid, these big like factories, but you can't even tell. A lot of them you can't tell when you're on the road that they're there because they have they're all shielded by these woods. So you turn in, and then there's this giant soy sauce factory that's back there. And it's interesting too. Chitose is only 30,000 people or
100,000.
Oh, it's 100,000,
Yeah,
right? It's 100,000.
90,000.
So that's right. It's a third the size of us, but the manufacturing is just on a totally different level. I mean, they have, and part of that is because obviously they're very close to it's the city of Sapporo, which is I think more than 2 million, and they also have access to a large international airport, which in some ways is quite similar to ours, is that they can very quickly get to the Japanese market. I mean, Tokyo and Honshu, the mainland Japan is a very quick flight away, and they have a bunch of flights every day. But it is remarkable that despite being quite much smaller than us and having a similar climate to us, they have much more manufacturing than we do.
Yes, and solar panels lining everything,
That's it.
all along the roads. Okay, so then we got to.
Chris?
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question
Yep.
about that
Yep.
for us, or,
Yeah.
so is that because, in terms of being really small but having all the industry, is that because they specifically put it there and people kind of live around that, or it's literally a industrial town and everybody lives
So
in the bigger city?
It's the airport town of
That's it.
Sapporo.
And it's
Yeah.
flat. It's a flat airport town. right?
Okay,
It's-
then what kind of relationship do they have to their residential areas then? I mean, is it just?
All
The
around.
residences are sort of, so they, yeah, Japanese residences tend to be denser, and so the city itself is denser than Anchorage, but I would say the residential area is sort of separate from the industrial area,
But
but
it's
then
considered
mixed
in
in
that
with the
community?
commercial area. Yeah, but it's all
Yes.
one community.
And there were several small communities within the bigger community. Kind of tightly, though, Girdwood would be right next to South Anchorage. Wasn't a 40-mile distance.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. We drove up. Oh, you're gonna go.
yeah, we'll get there. So, but then what was really fun, there was a community celebration at the local shrine, and I didn't have great pictures of the shrine. Right to the gate on the bottom photograph, you march up these stairs, and this was the mayor and his delegation. These were these beautiful children, and it was right next door, like within very short walking distance of the school that is sister cities with Sand Lake Elementary. And so some of these kids are probably going to be those kids. And this was up at the shrine. And I took a picture of one of the prayers that one of the kids wrote. And it says, I wish that our world will be more, I can't read, healthy and no plastic. I am really happy that my parents spend lots of time making effort for my holidays in school. And so their kids are thinking the same thing some of our kids are thinking. Then we had dinner up at Lake Chitose, which is this volcanic lake surrounded by 3 volcanoes in this lake way up in the mountains. They claim it's the cleanest and clearest water in all of Japan. And we had a fantastic dinner. There's Ethan serving sake to the mayor of Chitose, and behind him is like the kind of the person who's in charge of the Japanese Chitose delegation, and he's like a super businessman. He has like 30 different businesses.
His business card has this.
Fold out.
It folds out.
It folds out.
It has 60 different companies on it.
It was amazing.
Can I add something?
Please.
The shrine, if you go back one, the shrine was built to commemorate the emperor visiting in the 19th century, I believe. So Sapporo, interestingly enough, and I don't know, is Sapporo on here?
No.
Sapporo?
Wait, yes.
Okay, so we can talk more about that later, but
Maybe not.
this part of Japan is a lot younger than the rest. The rest of Japan has been settled for thousands of years. This part of Japan didn't start to get heavily settled until about the same time as the gold rush, actually, and sort of after the Civil War.
Modern
period.
settled.
Yeah.
There were
It's not
indigenous
rice
people
culture,
there.
It wasn't rice culture based.
Yeah. This was traditional lands of the Ainu.
Yeah, well, that's right. So it was settled by what we now think of as the Japanese. The Ainu were living here for thousands of years, but the millions of Japanese people that now live there, it's actually much younger than the rest of Japan, which I didn't know until this trip.
So again, our celebration up there. This was their committee celebration dinner for us, and it was quite amazing. Fish from the lake, little slimy plant things that grew at the bottom of the lake, all kinds of delights and horrors. And it was a really fun dinner that went on for hours.
14 courses.
Yeah, it was course after course. I've asked Hiroko to ask a student to translate the menu. I brought a copy back, but I didn't get that in time. So then we planted a tree as the 50th anniversary tree, and so that's the
This
mayor's.
is Anchorage Park, by the way,
And they have a whole park dedicated to Anchorage.
and it's beautiful.
What kind of tree is it?
It's a local tree.
Yeah.
It's some kind of birch.
They have 50. They
I
have
don't
50
have
of
pictures.
our. What do we give them? Some kind of spruce.
Yeah, it
tree?
was spruce trees. They have 40 spruce trees for the 40th anniversary celebration, but a whole park. And so Ethan and, of course,
Yeah,
I had
exactly.
a
It's a
discussion
European bird cherry.
about the possibility of us setting up a park dedicated to our sister cities. And if we do Chitose, then likely the place would be behind Sand Lake Elementary in some of their trails over there. So that's a kind of to be determined conversation to come
Yeah,
from the trip.
You can't see it, but you can't read it. But what it says Chitose and Anchorage Park, basically. And there's this beautiful wooden jungle gym, and there's like a miniature golf, not miniature, what do you call it? Like, it's a golf course,
Yeah,
like
it's
a
miniature
small
golf.
golf
I
course.
got the class, he sent me a class.
Yeah,
and
and
even one.
It's this big, beautiful park that's honestly nicer than almost any park that we have. And so, yeah, and they named it after us. It's ridiculous.
Right. So then
like a-
we started the formal ceremonies, the recommitment of our 50th year anniversary. This is Mayor Berkowitz and the mayor of Chitose and 3 of the Ainu performers. And Japan just in April recognized Ainu people for the first time in their history as an actual separate and independent people. And so there's a whole indigenous movement starting in Japan that's very similar to ours. Their dances were elegant and similar to some of the things you would see Alaska Native performers do, and it was really cool.
Oh, they're coming.
And they're coming here in January. So we will be organizing some events around that with the Native Village of Eklutna, with the Sister City School, and with the Assembly. And they pulled out all stops, so we're going to do something fun and interesting. And they had taiko performers. This was a military division whose job it is to perform.
No, this is a club from that military division.
Okay.
They're all normal soldiers too.
Okay.
This is the club from the base.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then speeches, of course, speeches. And I don't have a picture of the signing, which is kind of weird. And then a final performance of their youth. But one of the most interesting things for me was the speeches. They had a high school competition of speeches in English of their students, and it was almost all girls. I think it was all girls who won to be able to be at this point. And their prize was to come here. And so they'll be coming in the spring. We want to tell some of the highlights of their speeches.
Yeah, and so it was an English competition, but they were supposed to present ideas that would improve their city. And so it was interesting because a lot of it dovetailed with what we were doing. They were talking about how do we keep people in Chitose? People fly into Chitose and then immediately go to other parts of Hokkaido without spending any money in Chitose. And I was like, oh, I know that problem. How do you keep people for one more day? And so they were talking about things like embracing their indigenous identity and improving the noticeability of Ainu in their community. They also talked about killing the deer and turning them into sausage.
They wanted to try reindeer sausage.
Because they want the reindeer sausage because they were infested with deer. They had another idea, was a curry camp, because apparently people make good curry there, and they were going to have this tourist attraction where people would come in and they go to this camp where you learn how to make good curry. And it was targeted, it was interesting, it seemed to be mostly, to me at least, targeted at the domestic Japanese market. That is, people in Honshu, the main island of Japan where Osaka and Tokyo and most of Japanese people live. When they come to Hokkaido, they were just passing through Chitose.
And I would add, if I could add, they were so savvy with their English. It was the curriculum.
Yeah, they made a pun with curriculum, like curriculum.
That was the name of their
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Me too. It's so savvy. And then there was the last one that they proposed, which was the tour guiding.
Oh, right. So it would be
local
volunteer
tours.
students.
Not with kids. I would do it with
That was
adults.
the city.
Oh, yeah, there was some symbol with their hands.
Yeah.
See, Chitose or something like that.
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And these kids were so bright, and the winners will be here. So. Then we had a formal dinner. That's Consul General Sato-san, and this was long after the signing. And this was, I had a big headache at this time. I was so tired. It just went on and on, sushi and food and conversation. And then there's Forrest and I presenting the resolution that we passed, in which Forrest read in Japanese to the membership, which made them very happy.
Oh, they love that.
They did. Harada-san translated it into Japanese, and then I read it in hiragana, which is like the Japanese script. I read it very slowly, like a baby deer or something.
Like a Sand Lake elementary kid.
Exactly.
It was awesome.
But they seem to appreciate my halting Japanese.
And then
And that's the head of their assembly, by the way. That's the chair.
That's their feelings.
That's the chair. That's the chair of their assembly.
now this next picture's out of order. I realize now.
Look how happy Chris looks. Oh my God. It's like, this is great.
No, I wait till the next one.
And this is where we presented the beer. You can talk
Right,
about
so
that?
yeah, and this is the next night, right? So this was the formal dinner, then there was the next night, and so this is out of order, but that's okay. So we hosted, the third event we hosted, it was the Anchorage dinner for them, and this was more of a hangout, stand up around tables and talk, and we were, in classic Alaskan sense, tardy and it got started late, unlike everything that they did, which was precise and absolutely on time. And I was outside translating a speech because when I landed, Amy said, "Oh, Chris, you're emceeing that event." And I had no notice. And so, and translating a speech into Japanese turns out is not so easy. The languages, they think differently.
Shockingly.
That's right. So, anyhow, but then I handed out 90 pounds of beer. Thank you, 49th State, which very much, it was the highlight of that night. The loudest, most raucous celebration, cheers, noise that came out of that room was when these giant cans of beer started circulating. And this is a beer town, and so it was just perfectly thematic. And so it was really the right touch, especially considering we were late and everything wasn't flawless. This took all the edges off and it made it perfect.
The BYO party.
You are, and so I had to pay an extra duty to get it past customs, and I had some problems. The beer cans in both suitcases, some exploded. And so one of them in Seattle, dealt with that in Seattle, and then one of them at customs, and it was leaking out of my suitcase. And so with the customs officers, I'm like, "Come here." So I open my bag, find the guilty beer, and so I'm walking through, and there's no trash cans in customs, right? It's all secure. And I ask him, "What do I do with this?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Can I drink this?" He says, "Yes." So I pop open at customs and literally drink a beer. It was so funny, and paid $65 of duty, and they let it in, no problem. So
There's a very, to answer your question, it's very smoky. What's it called?
It's a smoked Marzen. We won a gold medal at the World Beer Cup and the Great American, the two biggest beer competitions.
Nice.
thank you so much. It really made the event that night.
Very smoky. All right.
It's
So-
campfire in a glass.
I gotta jump, but I have to go to a wedding.
You can't wait for just the next three pictures.
Okay.
I think you guys see
Very
it.
quick.
So the next part of the tour was where it got to the soulful part of the tour. This was parties and celebration, pomp and circumstances, and I do have the signed commitment for the next 50 years that should go in that case right there that I brought back. And then Ethan, I don't know if this was to you or to the city. This is the fan that they gave you
It's to the city.
at the opening of the event, and so.
Went all the way to Japan for this.
Right, and so this is the formal, here I am giving you back to the city, the formal communications from.
You guys can come use the golf clubs. We'll have it all.
Before you go to represent the
I
kata,
don't even know. I think it's, and I'll bring them in. You can just say.
two other things from Chitose. One, this is 49th State Brewery. We also had a bunch of Alaskan seafood
Yes.
from ASME that provided. So we were showing them, mostly salmon. And then the other thing is the night before this, their formal night, they let us show videos about Anchorage. And so we showed two. We showed one that was sort of a general tourist and was all like, it was mostly like kayaking and glaciers. There was another one though that we basically created. It was in a clue from the museum. Aaron Leggett gave us a video that was 7 minutes, and we edited it down to 3 minutes and then translated it to Japanese. It was all about the Eklutna people and the fact that the Eklutna people are here in Anchorage. And I think that was something that really had an impact because the sort of indigenous story of Anchorage hadn't been told. And I think that it turned out really well. And it was, as Chris would say, it was very cool. People were rapt attention while that video was going.
Here's how I would say it. Before that, no one was paying attention. We played the ATIA video,
Visit Anchorage.
the Visit Anchorage. Like, no one cared. It was like, blah, 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 everyone's having their conversations. As soon as Aaron and the Designer story started, the room became silent. Everyone was paying attention. It was a very interesting shift in the room as soon as we showed that story. So I agree. We also went to Sapporo, and we went up the Olympic ski jump and all that stuff, but I didn't have that, so.
Tourist stuff.
Touristy stuff. So then on to Rakuza and Takata. This is on the way to the village that was.
I do have to go because I have to, like.
I'll show you these pictures later then, because
I definitely wanna see
I got
them.
pictures of the disaster recovery, and I think it's important.
Okay.
But we'll talk
But you're
about
not
it.
showing that other one.
No, we're already past that. Like I said, I didn't show
Okay.
the best pictures. You might be able to see it on my phone later if you ask nicely. So, nothing
It's a
untoward.
stunt double. Really, it's just a stunt double.
Nothing untoward at all. Just don't go to must-read list. So these three young men are actually exchange students who came to Anchorage and who visited us at the airport when we landed. The gentleman To the far left is a professor of civil engineering and disaster preparedness and recovery for Ricos and Tecate. And he is one of the premier experts on recovery from massive disaster. And then there's on the way, cute little dragonfly. We stopped for lunch up at the top looking down at this amazing old kind of farmhouse. It's hard to describe how beautiful it was, but it was also 90 degrees outside. It was good to be in the shade. Again, lovely lunch. So this is a building that survived the tsunami. This is the town where Monty Dixon died. He was washed away. He's an Anchorage UAA student, Japanese. And the reason we went there was Hiroko was his instructor. And this building you're looking at, everyone who was in that building died except for those who got to the roof. The ones who made it to the roof survived. So essentially the water made it to the roof line. And you can see all around it's kind of flattened out. They're leaving that building, and right behind it on the right is the retaining seawall that they've built to rebuff a wall that might come in similarly. So this is another view of the wall and parkland that's surrounding the front of it. That is, if you can see there now, like roads and kind of sidewalks being platted in, and you can see dirt. Some of this area will be constructed on. And then this was a hostel. Thankfully, it was not in use at the time of the disaster. This is really close to the water. You'll see it from another angle. Right behind it, you see tractors, but you can also see how the material is literally pushed out the windows. The water came from the other side and poured through, flattening this building. This is a view from the seawall. The sea looks oh so peaceful, and out there, the beautiful oyster beds. It's a very big economy for oyster beds. And down below, this is a village that used to have 70,000 trees, pine trees, and all of them died except for one in the tsunami. And they're planting in its place outside of the seawall here 40,000 pine trees to grow back. And they're covering this wall with greenery. It's going to grow over and look like an earthen dam. And so this wall is part of their system of ensuring that the 1,000-year tsunami doesn't devastate their town again.
Chris?
Yes?
How were they able to fund all that? I mean, that has
Well,
to be an amazing.
yeah, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
We'll come back to that. For sure, that's a critical question. So that's what it will look like eventually. Looking down, you can see the whole plateau here of their village that was completely flattened. So we're up on a part of town where they're putting new housing, where they've moved everyone. It's way, way up. And next to an elementary school. Some of you might have heard me talk about, they did something amazing. They built a conveyor belt, the world's largest conveyor belt. This is the remnant structure, because this was the only bridge that remained. They fixed it really quickly. And so it would take 10 years to do what they needed to do if they used this road 24/7. And they needed that road to get people in and out and supplies in and out. So they built a giant conveyor belt. They ground down this massive mountain, and then they lifted their whole town 30 feet. Right? So they added 30 feet of new land and a massive wall as a preventive mechanism for stopping a huge, huge volume of water. And over here in another picture, I hope I have it, is a sea gate that they put in. Tsunami alert, the gate goes down. So the wave can't even go up the river. And so, but they also built their waterways so that they could handle more flow. So this whole area was where their old ancient village was, and it got completely wiped away. So in this area, they are creating a national park. This is that one building I showed that has the water coming through. I believe this is the structure that had the rooftop. And this triangular building right here, just at the very top of it, there's a mark on the wall where you can see the high water mark was. So this whole place just got completely flooded for 6 miles up the river. Yeah. This to me was definitely the most intense place. So I'll go back to that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I confused the populations. Chitose was only between 20 and 30,000 people.
Right.
It's not a large town, but it's been there for 700 years. So when we were standing, where this picture was taken, we were standing up next to a new elementary school. And I asked the special assistant to the mayor, did you consider moving the town, rather than these massive works, right? So he said, no, there was never a question. We were going to rebuild this town. And you ask how did they fund it? Their equivalent to the federal government spent $3.5 billion on this 20,000 person town. That's just like, I think that's actually a low estimate. I think that's just the raising the town, the seawall, and some of the other infrastructure. They also got a lot of outside funds, and they built a new highway system essentially to accomplish this. And that I don't think he was even counting. They built a bunch of new tunnels to get through mountains to connect the highway system to here, so they could get things here quicker. All of it was done by their central federal government. Their federal government said, this region, because Chitose is one of the cities which was destroyed, although it was the worst in terms of destruction. Their federal government said, this entire region has been devastated. We are going to take basically the entire wealth and power of the nation, and we are going to direct it towards rebuilding this area. So I don't know the last time we did anything like this. Maybe the Hoover Dam. The United States just doesn't do these kind of real recoveries anymore, where we say, this area was wiped out. We are going to lift you up completely. That's what happens.
Or we have these disasters 5 times a year, every year now, and managing it has become really difficult.
So, how close is this to where the nuclear power?
1 hour by
It's
high-speed
120.
train.
Yeah, it's like 128 miles, something like that. They told us.
It's less than an hour then. So yeah, far enough away. I really wish I had one of those. What do they call it? The things you.
Geiger counter.
No, the thing that shows if you've been exposed and by how much.
Radiation.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have one on the train going through, because we came within 30 miles of the reactor. We're outside of the exclusion zone, but on the train system for sure. And that moves on to the next. But this place, I believe, and I'm going to start working privately on some effort to, in their 10-year anniversary of this devastation, have some kind of an Anchorage presence honoring Monty Dixon, who is one of 2 Americans who died in the whole event. And we should, in some way, figure out a lasting mark to make in this conversation. So I'll be working on that, and you might hear something publicly about it, but for sure privately.
And there is an exchange between universities closest to here and UAA.
Right, which is Awate University, yeah. And so there are ongoing legs, and that's because of Hiroga Harada. I wish you were able to be here right now. So, and just a personal, strange and odd note, if Miyazaki, the cartoonist, Spirited Away. So we were sitting in the hotel, which is on the hill across, on that kind of green bluff there. And there's a broken door, 2 glass doors, Arctic entry, and the wind came howling into that building. And Amy Kaufman and I were sitting there, and I look at her and I'm like, did you hear that? It literally sounded like wailing souls pouring into that building. It was super duper heavy. This place, 1,000 years from now, they'll be talking about the mayor who saved their city and how they rebuilt, because they are completely transforming themselves. It is amazing. So then we headed to Tokyo, high-speed train, and that was Mr. Murakami, who was the mayor's special assistant, kind of as Amy called him, the James Bond of that area, 007. He knows everybody everywhere, works for the United Nations. And we jumped on a high-speed train. Bullet trains are incredible. We got to Tokyo and ended up doing a bunch of things, including an old shrine on a very, very, very hot day when we were really tired. And then we went up this tower, second tallest structure in the world, and then had a dinner when we should have probably been at the hotel sleeping. No, there were like high-speed elevators up this thing. It's far.
It's called the Sky Tree. It wasn't even there last time I was in Japan. It's very new, but it's only the Burj Dubai is taller.
Yeah, it is an amazing structure. The view from up there is
the top of the building or from the ground? Is it from the ground?
It's from the ground. Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a small mall that's underneath it, and then it's a subway station. Actually, it's a train station.
It was built by a train company.
Yeah, it's a train station that just goes into the sky. So that's really the summary of the trip. The Sister City Exchange, if we are hosting one in the future, to the clerk and put in your notes, be very formal about order and get it in such a way that it's structured. Whoever is organizing it, make sure, tell us to make sure that they are following good, healthy protocol and diplomatic rules, because it was so orderly there.
So Chris or
Yep.
Forrest, because they had the opportunity to kind of rebuild like that, and the Japanese have innovations like Europe and that, that we really don't even know exist. But Were they able to talk about some of the other things that they've been basically innovative about? I mean, obviously you talked about the conveyor belt, and anyway, were there any things that you kind of went, wow, I never heard of that?
Really, it was the scale and scope of the project for me was what was mind blowing.
I think it was interesting when we met with the mayor. The interesting thing he talked about was their seniors. That was a big concern for him.
Right.
Was that their seniors were having difficulty adjusting. So they did interesting things like they rebuilt the city, and they were like, it's an old village, so the roads are kind of crooked or have like mistakes in them. Essentially, they rebuilt the roads with those mistakes. Intentionally,
Okay, yeah.
they didn't make it completely modern. They intentionally left in
What a
some
nice
of the
thought.
right. And the thought was, and they were going to put little signs that said like. So for the elders, it would say, here's a hotel here now, but there's a sign that says this used to be the post office. As they're rebuilding.
30 feet below you.
To give so that the elders there will still have a sense of place.
Right.
And
Yeah, that makes
interestingly,
sense.
on a more sad note, what he talked about at that time was that there's one group of people who are dislocated the worst,
Yeah.
and that's old men. Because in their traditional culture, the women took care of almost everything. And if the women died in that family, he didn't have a network to hold him up. And so they find suicidality is the worst in their old men, and they're having to create whole systems to ensure that they're able to make it through the course of their lives.
Well, we could learn something from that, because that's happening to our Vietnam veterans.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even old folks in general. We were at the senior center today, and I was thinking about that. Right?
Well, it's funny. He said it in Japanese. I don't know if I translate this for you, but he basically said like the obachan, the grandmothers are fine.
Yes.
They said. The grandmothers are doing fine. The grandfathers we have a lot of problems
Yeah.
with. He said like
Yeah.
it was sad. The women just kind of
'Cause they were
keep
always
trucking
doing it.
because they're badasses.
Fascinating.
So, thank you for listening. It was quite an epic trip,
And we paid for it out of pocket.
well, I paid for my assembly small whatever, but it wasn't from the sister city funds. It was
I
my
paid
own.
for it out of
Well,
pocket.
it begs the question to me though, of, okay, so obviously they've been through this trauma,
Yeah.
and they've recovered in a way that is just amazing. So what do we have to show them about
Well,
what we do here?
Rikuzen Takata is different than Chitose. So Rikuzen, the place that was destroyed, we're not their sister city. We just went there. So they probably won't come here. I mean, maybe
Oh, right.
Mr. Murakami might.
Okay.
They might. But Chitose, they weren't damaged by the tsunami. I think we have a lot to show them. I think we're actually further down the road when it comes to indigenous rights, for example, and the role of the indigenous community. I think we obviously have a lot of wonderful nature to show them. But they are economically, they are thriving in a way that we are not.
Yeah.
They're
There's no
growing.
question.
And one thing we suggested was we would take them to a cannabis operation.
Oh yeah, they freaked out.
One of them really for 20 minutes, he couldn't even think. The other one was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. That's crazy. It's illegal, but so of
He
course.
said one of the professors said that if he was caught smoking marijuana, it would be a national news story. Like
And
university
all that-
professor caught with
he
marijuana.
would lose his job, he would lose his life.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
everything
I was
would
like,
be
well, that's
gone.
very different culture from our academics.
Yeah.
Well, Chair Rivera had to leave, and he told me when everyone was finished that I was supposed to hit the gavel
Yeah,
and
well,
finish.
call it
Yeah.
good. Thank
All
you.
right, we're adjourned. Have a good weekend.